So we are continuing in our Hebrews series this morning. Today's topic, what do we expect of faith? So this morning we begin by asking the question, what do we expect of faith? What do you expect of faith? Have you ever asked this question? Have you ever thought about it? What do we hope to gain by having faith? Why do we endeavor to live a life of faith? Today in our study of Hebrews, we are going to look at chapter 11. And this is one of the most widely recognized sections of the Bible dedicated to this conversation of faith. It is a sobering look at faith as it addresses the lives of many of heroes and heroines of faith found in the Bible. So let's read together chapter 11 from Hebrews. It's a long chapter, so bear with me. Really beautiful though. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life, so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he didn't know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he, as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sands on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they'd been thinking of the country they'd left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promise was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who was invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And what more shall I say? I don't have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were others who were tortured, refused to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskin and goatskin, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. Wow. Such a reminder of lives lived by faith in the Bible. It's quite a list of people who had faith. Many who did amazing things by faith and received what they had hoped for most. And many others who did not receive what they'd hoped for most, instead suffered terribly. Yet were still considered people who had faith. Over the past 2 Sundays, we've been looking at the book of Hebrews. We looked at the history of the book, when it was written, who the author was, or rather was not. We learned Hebrews is written more as a sermon than as a letter, and to a highly educated audience. We also learned the people the author was writing to had and were experiencing great persecution for their faith. So, the author wrote this sermon to encourage readers not to give up on their faith in the midst of persecution and trials. So this chapter, Hebrews 11, is the climax of the sermon. And our author reminds his audience of the amazing things people accomplished by faith, and at the same time reminds them that many people who had faith suffered terribly and were overcome by the circumstances around them. But the point he makes is clear. Both groups of people had faith. Just because we suffer and things do not go according to our plan doesn't mean we don't have faith. Intimate trust in Jesus Christ places all of our hopes and dreams in his hands, regardless of whether they are fulfilled or not. Why? Because the reason for faith is connection with God. Everything else is a bonus that we can live with or without, right? If the purpose of our faith is to get what we want, our faith is twisted and self-serving, and we will never experience the fullness of God with that kind of motivation underlying our faith. However, if the reason we trust God is to connect with him, we can take or leave the blessings he pours out on us. We don't need them to be fulfilled. And ironically, then, we are free to enjoy them without being addicted to them to make us feel good or to fill a hole in our lives. This is the kind of faith that sustains us through tough times and through suffering. For some of us, I dare say many of us here today, the hope of what our lives could be or could have been has been dashed, just like many of our heroes of faith in Hebrews 11. But they struggle on because the foundation of their faith was found not in getting what they wanted, but rather in experiencing God. Everything we do here as a people who meet on Sunday mornings, is to encourage one another, to teach, to direct, to lead each other into fellowship with God, to genuinely experience God. The true purpose of faith is to reconnect with God and have access to God. Now, this is a big passage as we read together, and certainly we can't completely unpack it in the short time that we have this morning. However, I would like to look at a couple of key verses. Verses like, number 1, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Some people have interpreted this to mean we must believe we will receive what we hope for, and that equals faith. To believe I will get it before I do, to visualize getting it, that equals faith. There are many who teach that if only we have faith, if only we believe, we can make anything become a reality. Have you ever heard people say, if you believe it, it will come true? Sure, there's lots of teachings out there like that. I have heard that as well. And although there may be some truth in it, like the salesman who really believes in his product, he's much more likely to convince someone to buy it than a person who doesn't believe in the product, or the person who believes that they can do something as opposed to someone who believes that they can't do something. Who do you think has the greater chance of being successful? Well, obviously the one who believes that he or she is going to be able to accomplish that task. But that's not the faith of the New Testament. And we must be aware of the difference between the faith of positive thinking and the faith Jesus has called us to. Confidence in what we hope for does not mean we just have to really believe it in order to get what we want. Alexander Purdy in the Interpreter's Bible Commentary points out, faith then is assurance of things hoped for, the desired access to the divine presence. That is what we hope for. And the assurance of things not seen, the unseen God who is and is the rewarder. We don't see God, but he is the assurance of things unseen. This is the kind of faith Jesus has called us to. This is the kind of faith the author of Hebrews is encouraging his readers to have. A faith that transcends our own desires and discovers the one who gives life to life. And regardless of what we're going through here on earth, faith achieves so much more than getting what we want in life. The author of Hebrews does not deny that faith achieves great things here and now in our lives, but there is something greater we receive when we have true faith. Continuing with his comment on Hebrews 11, Alexander Purdy also says, faith achieves results on the earthly plane, but its chief glory lies in its power to link humanity indissolubly with the heavenly realm, sustaining them to endure all imaginable sufferings and even martyrdom. This is difficult for us to imagine, as we live in a country where we're free to worship as we please, and martyrdom isn't a reality for us. And as a result of our freedom and sometimes excessive luxury, our understanding of faith becomes easily twisted and self-serving. Let's be honest with one another. Our primary focus is not on knowing Christ, but being happy, getting what we want. We just want to be okay, right? We use faith as a tool to get what we want, and all the motivational speakers and gurus in the world encourage us to do so all the time. However, the author of Hebrews is telling us that we miss the point of faith if we only focus on how God can fulfill our desires. We miss connection with God on a level that brings real joy into our lives. And we miss Jesus, the full revelation of God in human form, just for us. It is faith in Christ which reconnects us with God. As a result, we have sustaining life that frees us from needing anything in this world. And that, as I mentioned before, ironically frees us to fully enjoy all that God has created for us. And to be sure, sustaining us through all imaginable suffering and pain that may come our way. So, faith is not about what we want, it's about connecting with God. Faith is not about everything going our way, but discovering a sustaining life which carries us through anything. And faith is not about creating our own reality, but discovering the reality of a genuine experience with God. Abraham understood this reality and chased after it his whole life. God told him to go to the land he would show him, and so he did, traveling with his whole family, his staff, his possessions, all his animals. It would have been like traveling with a small village. Sometimes he got distracted and settled. Sometimes he made mistakes and suffered for them. And definitely his faith and the faith of his wife Sarah were tested by their lack of a son, and then the request to give up that long-awaited son once he had arrived. But they continued to move forward. I love the way the author says in verses 15 and 16. If they had been thinking of the country they'd left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. This idea of moving forward to a better place, a better country, speaks of a restlessness within the Christian, a dissatisfaction with life as it is, a desire for more, not more stuff, not more ease, not more money, but more depth to our relationship with God, a desire for more God. It speaks to a tension that is found in the life of every person of faith, a tension that acknowledges that God has promised us so much, and yet we may not see his promises come to fulfillment. This ever looking forward to the future promise is always a mark of the faithful. Harry Cotton in the Interpreter's Bible Commentary says, "It is a tension between the righteousness of God and the sin of man, between the purity of Christ and the stain of a bad conscience, between the love of Calvary and the anger and fighting that turns our world into hell, between the peace that passes all understanding and the inability to sleep at night, between the perfect light of God's truth and the darkness of our ignorance." And he goes on to say, when we have accepted ourselves and our world as it is, our faith is dead. When we have accepted ourselves and our world as it is, our faith is dead. Dead because we don't seek the promise of life that only Jesus can provide. Dead because we have embraced the limited joy and peace this life offers when Jesus offers us so much more. Dead because we do not fight for justice in a desperate world that needs champions to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. And dead because we have replaced meaningful connection with one another with a level of acceptance that leaves us feeling politely welcomed, but never heartily embraced. Finally, our faith is not given blindly to one who we do not know, but to the one who created us. Hebrews 11:3 says, "He knows us intimately. He is one who is trustworthy and has a trustworthy track record." I tell you the truth, faith is not blind. You've probably heard that saying, faith is blind. We've all heard it. Do you ever remember the contemporary Christian music artist, Amy Grant? She has two of some of the most beautiful Christmas albums we've ever heard of. We play them every year in our home at Christmas. And yet in one of her songs, she has this line that says, "Only in our blind belief can we know the truth." I think that's such a terrible line because it's not true at all. And yet the music is beautiful, so I listen to it every year anyway. Our belief is not blind, but rather our faith is based on an incredible track record. A track record recorded in the Bible and in the lives of millions of people who have experienced God's real presence in their lives throughout the centuries. In 2020, I'm excited to reveal we will return to our series on the history of the church and pick up where we left off a couple of years ago, just prior to the Reformation. And we will see one more time all the lives of the saints of faith. Our faith in God is not based on some arbitrary hope, but on an incredible track record. The author of Hebrews is writing to encourage the believers who were under great persecution not to give up their faith. And this was no arbitrary encouragement. Within it, he offers the greatest list of faithful lives found in the Bible, more than 20 of them. He doesn't leave his readers hanging, but gives example after example of people who had faith, a track record on which to base their own lives of faith. 40 verses of example after example of what lives of faith look like. And Harry Cotton in the Interpreter's Bible Commentary notes, faith is not impressed by its own valor, but by the faithfulness of God. It doesn't create its own certainties, but lays hold of the certainties of God. He's the track record. True faith is not blind, but recognizes God's work and faithfulness through the ages. This is why we have such a huge list of how God worked in the lives of those who had faith. And this is our encouragement today, to place our faith in God. So, what do we expect of faith? We expect that faith is not about what we want. It's about connection with God. We expect that faith is not about everything going our way, but discovering a sustaining life which carries us through anything that we face. We expect that faith is not about embracing or resigning ourselves to this life, but moving forward toward the hope of what God has promised us. And finally, we expect that faith is not blind, but rests on the faithfulness of God and the certainties of his existence, for which there are many stories of men and women before us who have discovered the faithfulness of God in their own lives, and their accounts are written for all humankind to read and identify with, especially in Hebrews chapter 11. Amen. Let's bow our heads. Father, we thank you for the amazing track record that you have, the faith that you have shown in the lives of all these men and women we read about in chapter 11 of Hebrews, the faith that we see in our own lives, the faithfulness that you are everything for us. And Father, I confess in my own life, I don't seek more God. I don't seek more of you. And I suspect there are many of us in that situation. And Father, I ask that you encourage us to seek you more, to desire more, to be in your presence, to know that faith is not blind, but based on an absolute track record of you working in our lives, sustaining us in the hard times, rejoicing with us in the good times, and through it all, loving us no matter what. In your precious name, amen.